They're also pretty interchangeable as well, but just keep in mind that one's a bit more greeny and one's a bit more reddy. Happy New Year, everyone! I know some of you are still on holiday, but I'm here to display my commitment to the world of painting and decorating by giving you a color code episode on HC 100 by Benjamin Moore. For the first time in 2022, we got the code, now let's get to cracking. I really hope the year has treated you well so far, and if not to fret, because I'm going to take a deep dive into Glocester Sage, which is not only part of Benjamin Moore's historical colors, but more recently, it was part of the 2022 Benjamin Moore color trends, which of course were announced alongside the color of the year, October Mist. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's the second darkest color that was announced next to Mysterious, which we also talked about on a previous episode. But enough about dark navy blue, let's talk about this beautiful, rich, mossy brown. Hit that like button if you are liking my color descriptions, because they're sometimes hard to come up with. So Glocester Sage, and no, it's not pronounced Gloucester, it's Gloucester. It's a rich brown color with an LRV of 17.84. Some brown colors can feel akin to a warm reddish hot chocolate, but others like this one have a subtle green undertone instead. I like to equate this color as a tree that has just the faintest layer of moss or lichen built up on its bark. I really enjoy dark browns as accent colors specifically because they never really feel like they're out of place in most cases. So if you're thinking about your overall color palette in your home, and I'm talking about everything, including furniture and floors, even your ceilings, a lot of people will already have brown incorporated one way or another, probably not on your ceiling, but maybe your floors. And if you've been assessing the trendy colors that have been coming out, green is a staple in many color schemes. So Glocester Sage has a really nice combination of both of those elements. Green and brown mixed into one deep color. It's adaptable, it's versatile, and while it can be used as a main all over the room paint color, not quite all over the house, it's also a suitable accent color for a more toned down shaded color that will help harmonize your space. We've talked about accent walls a few times on this channel before, but they're just a really great way to change up the space without painting every single wall. Maybe you just gotta do one or two. If you want to know whether Glocester Sage would work as an accent wall in your room, I strongly encourage testing it out with a mighty board, because all you would need to do is just paint the board itself and then secure it to the wall that you plan on painting right against the corner of the wall next to it. That will give you a really strong impression as to how that new accent color will coordinate with your existing wall colors on the other walls. I'll have some Mighty Boards information down below if you need to pick some up. So let's start with the light color pairing here. And I actually went pretty darn light in this case. The color I chose was White Opulence, which is part of the Off-White collection, OC-69. The LRV here is 89.5, and the color itself is kind of like the lightest shade of pearl you can imagine. The color really comes to life as a standalone off-white because it has this hint of a peachiness to it, but it's so bright that the orange warmth will be extremely subtle in the grand scheme of things. It has enough color hue within it that if you were to use it as a light trim color, for example, especially when you pair it with Glocester Sage, then you might notice the saturation a little bit more, but I see White Opulence as a corresponding paint color on larger surfaces like cabinets or even walls. It performs exceptionally well in areas with warmer lighting, which will bring its undertones to life. For the mid-tone color, we have another fairly light color, all things considered, especially for a mid-tone color. But what it lacks in depth of value, it makes up for in its color intensity. For something really fun, you could use color code 618 Robin's Nest. This color really jumps off the screen, or the color swatch, or the mighty board, because it takes some of the green in Glocester Sage and mixes it with Tiffany blue to give you a minty fresh turquoise that is so much fun. When you start with a color like brown, or a greeny brown even, there can be a tendency to live within the world of earthy neutrals and beige and gray. So that's why I wanted to present Robin's Nest as a really fun, dynamic option that also has a classy element to it. You might be wondering where to use a color like this. And to be honest, it's up to you. A lot of my clients like to use their powder room or their first floor washroom as their color laboratory where they can experiment a bit more freely. Or you could also find this color in pillow form and just use them as your tertiary color in your overall palette, just to add a pop of that turquoise. But what about the dark color? Well, we have another dark color as part of the 2022 color trends in Mysterious, which we did have a color code episode about, and those two worked pretty well together, but I want to find something that is just a little more complementary, and that would mean complementing the bit of green in Glocester Sage with the bit of red found in Silhouette. AF655. Silhouette is part of the Affinity color collection, which is one of my personal favorites, and it's sort of a red charcoal gray that is nearly 10 points darker with an LRV right around 8. Even though they're technically opposites when we're talking about their undertones, which can give them a neat little dynamic back and forth, they're both also closely related to dark brown, so they can freely coexist in the same space and not feel too overwhelming. Based on their similar values or their perceived darkness, they're also pretty interchangeable as well, but just keep in mind that one's a bit more greeny and one's a bit more reddy. Now we are finally at the trim color section. Normally I would go for an off-white or a color that would be perceived as white, but I wanted to do things a little bit differently here. While you could use Glocester Sage as both your wall and trim color in the same room, I would instead gravitate more towards a color that can contrast the depth that Glocester Sage brings. The color I'm going with on the trim and the woodwork is called Rodeo, and it is a 60.65 LRV warm gray, but what it feels like to me is more of a very light taupe. Unlike Glocester Sage, Rodeo doesn't have an obvious green undertone to it, and because of that, when it's used as a surrounding trim color, you'll start to see more of the green come out in Glocester Sage HC100. They both share the commonality of a shaded brown, but they're also living independently as well. My impulse would be to accentuate that little bit of green in Glocester Sage because sage is in the name after all. It's supposed to be kind of green. There's another pretty awesome green color that was recognized by Benjamin Moore right over here, although this one is lighter and I would say it's a lot more versatile in general.